This is the true story of a cactus attack. But even more interesting than that story is the story of how the cactus was controlled.
Australia once faced an agricultural crisis so vast that 60 million acres of farmland were rendered utterly useless. Entire regions vanished beneath towering walls of spined green flesh. The culprit wasn't drought or fire, it was a cactus. Farmers threw everything at it: fire, poison, pulverizing machines, even talk of military flamethrowers. But the cactus advanced like a slow-motion avalanche, swallowing the heart of the country at 1 million acres per year. When all hope seemed lost, scientists took a desperate risk on a biological experiment no one had dared try at this scale. Stay close to discover how a fragile moth larva not only saved the land, but earned a monument in its name. A land swallowed whole. By the early 20th century, large swaths of eastern Australia no longer resembled farmland. Fields that once grew wheat or supported grazing cattle had been overtaken by a living barricade, dense, towering walls of prickly pear cactus. To walk into one of these zones was to step into a maze of green spines, impenetrable and unyielding. The invasion wasn't sudden. It crept forward with silent persistence, turning millions of acres into botanical fortresses that defied human will. Farmers stood helpless as fences vanished beneath thickets of cactus pads. Livestock starved in paddocks they could no longer navigate. Families watched as the land they had cleared by hand, often over years, vanished beneath this multiplying intruder. The damage wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Communities began to fracture, properties were abandoned, and generational farms slid toward bankruptcy. Land that had been sold with promise was now worthless, crushed under the weight of spines that no plow could pierce. What made the situation unbearable was the cactus's speed. It was estimated to be spreading by 1 million acres each year, an ecological tsunami with no known pause. It advanced in silence, thriving in Australia's dry interior, and everything people tried to stop it, fire, digging, grinding, either failed or made it worse. This was no longer a nuisance. It was a national crisis. Seeds of the catastrophe. The crisis didn't begin with malice. It began with color, specifically the vibrant crimson dye once reserved for kings, cardinals, and colonial armies. In the late 18th century, the British Empire sought to break Spain's monopoly on cochineal, a powerful red pigment derived from insects that thrived on prickly pear cactus. In 1788, when Captain Arthur Phillip's first fleet arrived in Australia to establish a penal colony, they brought with them not just convicts and supplies, but a few potted hopes, prickly pear plants infested with cochineal bugs. The insects died almost immediately, unable to survive the new climate. But the cactus, it flourished. Settlers, seeing no immediate threat, welcomed it. Prickly pear became a popular hedge plant and ornamental addition to gardens. During droughts, its juicy pads were fed to livestock. At first, it seemed useful, even benevolent. But as settlers pushed inland, they carried cactus cuttings with them. The hot, arid interior west of the Great Dividing Range proved to be an ideal environment. By the mid-1800s, the common and spiny pest pear varieties had begun to spread unchecked. By 1919, it covered 22 million acres and was still growing rapidly. Reports described it not as a plant, but as a conquering force. It was a slow-motion ecological collapse born from an economic ambition half a world away. What began as an attempt to color British uniforms had become a creeping catastrophe, and no one could stop it, at least not yet. Desperation and defeat. By the turn of the 20th century, the prickly pear had become more than a nuisance. It was a national embarrassment. Government inspectors roamed the countryside issuing control orders, while landowners were held legally responsible for eradicating infestations that had become physically impossible to destroy. In theory, the law gave structure to the crisis. In practice, it only added pressure to people already losing their land. Armed with axes, torches, and desperation, farmers fought a battle they were never going to win. Fires scorched the visible cactus growth, only for new shoots to rise weeks later from hidden root systems. Horse-drawn rollers crushed pads into pulp, But fragments left behind rerouted themselves and spread the problem further. In some regions, people even turned to homemade poisons, the most popular being an acidic blend of sulfuric acid and arsenic pentoxide, a mix dangerous enough to harm humans and livestock alike. Spraying this mixture by hand across acres of land became a slow, toxic ritual, exhausting to the body and fruitless to the soil. The financial toll mounted. Property values plummeted. Communities that had once thrived on agriculture watched their economies collapse. Queensland offered a massive £10,000 sterling reward, equivalent to over $2 million Australian dollars today, for anyone who could devise a successful eradication method. No one could claim it. Every attempt failed in the face of a plant that refused to die. What Australia needed now was a solution from beyond its borders, and maybe even beyond its imagination. A dangerous idea. In 1913, a team of Australian scientists set sail for the Americas with an unorthodox mission: to study the prickly pear cactus not as an enemy, but as it existed in the wild, alongside its natural predators. What they found in the arid landscapes of Argentina and Mexico changed everything. There, prickly pear was just one plant among many, kept in check by a complex web of insect herbivores and pathogens. It did not dominate, it coexisted. And that observation sparked a radical thought. What if Australia could borrow nature's own tools? The idea was bold and fraught with risk. Introducing foreign species to solve an ecological crisis was unheard of on such a massive scale, but desperation breeds invention. In 1920, the Commonwealth Prickly Pear Board was formed with a singular goal: find a biological control agent that could stop the cactus in its tracks without harming native ecosystems or crops. Scientists collected over 30 species of insects and fungi to study in quarantine labs back home. Among them, one stood out. Cactoblastis cactorum, a moth native to Argentina, had larvae that burrowed into cactus pads and devoured them from the inside out. But it wasn't enough to simply hope. Researchers subjected the moth to painstaking tests, offering it every kind of native and cultivated plant they could find. Again and again, the caterpillars refused anything but Opuntia, the cactus. That singular focus made it the perfect candidate. Still, even with a promising agent in hand, the idea of releasing it into Australia's ecosystem was a monumental gamble. One misstep could unleash a second invasion, only this time, it would be their own doing. The invasion in reverse. In 1926, after years of testing, observation, and meticulous breeding, the first Cactoblastis cactorum moths were released into Australia's wild. It was a quiet beginning, a handful of carefully nurtured insects, placed onto cactus pads in isolated test plots. Yet what followed was a cascade of destruction, unlike anything the continent had seen. Only this time, it was the invader being undone. The caterpillars didn't nibble passively. They launched coordinated attacks. Working in teams, they tunneled through the tough outer skins of prickly pear pads to reach the nutrient-rich interior. Once inside, they devoured everything, hollowing out the plant from within. A single colony could reduce a healthy cactus to a rotting husk in weeks, and they reproduced with stunning speed. From just 527 female moths, scientists harvested over 100,000 eggs. Within a generation, that number grew into the millions. At the Chinchilla Prickly Pear Experimental Station, shipments of eggs were dispatched across the country, up to 14 million per day. Farmers received them in small cardboard boxes, along with a single instruction: place the eggs on your densest cactus patches and wait. Across Queensland and New South Wales, people watched in disbelief as walls of spiny green collapsed into mulch. Fields once abandoned came back to life. Grazing land was reclaimed. Entire communities that had teetered on economic collapse began to recover. And remarkably, not a single drop of poison or diesel was needed. Nature had sent in a specialist, perfectly adapted, and utterly relentless, one that would turn the tide on a crisis thought insurmountable. Evolution's secret weapon. Decades after the last cactus wall had crumbled and Australia's farmlands had healed, scientists uncovered a final twist in the story, one that revealed just how precisely nature had engineered its tiny hero. In 2017, researchers successfully decoded the genome of Cactoblastis cactorum, What they found wasn't just interesting, it was astonishing. Inside the moth's genetic blueprint were highly specialized enzymes, unique tools never before seen in any other insect, evolved specifically to break down the tough, fibrous tissues of Opuntia cactus. These enzymes allowed the caterpillars to digest the plant with an efficiency no artificial method could ever replicate. It explained their incredible precision, why the caterpillars never strayed to other vegetation, why they ignored native flora, and why the entire biological control campaign had succeeded with such surgical accuracy. Far from being a happy accident, the moth's success was rooted in evolutionary history. For thousands of years, it had coexisted with prickly pear in South America, gradually adapting into a specialist predator. When Australia recruited it, they weren't just importing a bug. They were borrowing the result of a long, quiet arms race between species. This discovery added a new layer of awe to an already remarkable chapter in environmental science. It wasn't just that the moth had saved a continent. It had done so with the kind of biological precision human engineering still struggles to match. In the war against the cactus, evolution had built the perfect weapon: the backlash. Decades after its success in Australia, Cactoblastis cactorum was introduced to Caribbean islands facing similar cactus problems. But this time, there was no evolutionary balance. The moth attacked native Opuntia species with the same precision it showed down under. Only now, the victims weren't pests. They were essential to local ecosystems and economies. When the moth reached Mexico, it devastated cultivated cactus crops used for food, medicine, and cultural traditions. The insect that once saved a continent was now threatening another. By the time the United States noticed its spread into southern regions, containment was nearly impossible. A biological miracle had become a global warning. Australia's bold gamble had worked, but not without consequences. In trying to control one invader, humans had unknowingly set another loose. What do you think? Was this one of the greatest environmental comebacks in history, or a cautionary tale still unfolding? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're into stories where nature rewrites the rules, hit subscribe. We've got more just like this coming soon.